Good evening, everyone. Time for episode 35 of The Drums of Doom. Getting near the end of the book. We're starting on page 448 on the 4th of November, 2020. Carmen's Rangers is attempting to escape from the Orc Citadel, and they're being pursued relentlessly through Under-Earth. Dal sang on, his forgotten voice found, gentle, soft, fair, and so good, that if evil was near, it would have been forced to flee or face its own terrible ugliness. His song was a testament to the wise leader that Carmen had become, because long before his song was through, most of their charges were fast asleep. They were beyond dreams, blissfully exhausted, sleeping upon stone as soft as down. Only he, Carmen, Tariq, Kerr, and the Baron had found it possible to resist his lullaby. Who shall take the first watch? We'll take watch, Carmen said. Tariq and I won't be able to sleep anyway. Sheathe your dagger. We have risked the light for too long. Sleep isn't a bad idea, Dal sighed. Who knows when we'll have to start running again? Karina has already joined her sister in dreams. Maybe I'll just sit by my mother for a while. He did, and soon he too slept. Kerr spoke with the Baron about many things, until the Baron had forgotten his own weaknesses long enough to fall asleep himself. Kerr rested his head against the stone, listening to the vibrations from above, at times awake and listening, and at other times drifting far away. Carmen and Tariq sat back to back, well past the hours of first watch. She's watching where they had come from, and he where they were going. But everything was eternal dark and everlasting quiet. They whispered of many things and various topics, but soon ran out of words. They had run out of things to say, except those things that people rarely feel free to speak of. Perhaps it was their desperate situation or the danger, but both Carmen and the Ranger spoke the same words at precisely the same moment. Yes. Yes, Tariq said. If it is not as I have dreamed, then I shall fall upon my sword at this very moment, and then I would join you. I have never loved any woman, human or elf, but I love you as surely as the stars shine in heaven. Carmen's next words were then cut short, because they had already turned and embraced each other with a passion as unbridled as the hearts of wild horses. I knew that I wouldn't get any sleep tonight, Kerr thought, as he quietly assumed guard. I can never understand why this sort of thing always happens at the worst of times. Checking on his father, he saw that he was fast asleep and snoring. It made him think of home. The lovers entered a place where no one else could follow. She removed her helm and her armor. She was completely blind, surrounded by the pressing dark. Tariq was her eyes, and she was his soul. All that she could do was feel and smell and listen to his heart and his breath. He was her first love, and she was his, and there could never be another. It was there, 2 miles below, that they shared a lifetime of love, surrounded by stone and beset by evil. There was no witnesses to their joining, save for a stalwart dwarf, and he dutifully kept his back turned and his thoughts far away. They loved for a long time, in a joining that had been forced to wait too long, and which could no longer be stopped. When it was over, they collapsed into exhausted sleep, 2 lonely warriors, forever joined. Kerr covered them with their cloaks when he heard the first murmurings of life from the sleepers. Their love, though no longer a secret, was understood by them all. Dal, Kerr said, it is time for your light. It is a little cold down here, Kalor joked. On your feet, Kerr ordered. Our leaders had a few difficult wounds to bind, and as everyone knows, some bandages are hard to apply alone. And as it is quite chilly down here, Leander said, it only makes sense to share bodily warmth. His own hand was wrapped around Robin's when he said it. Don't get any ideas, Dartine rumbled. Strap your armor tight, Kerr said, and empty your boots. There are things that crawl around down here that would just love to dine on your feet. It was then that the orcs' drums began again. Thrum-doom, thrum-doom, from above them. They are upon us, the Baron said. No, Kerr replied, but they have breached Dow's wall. Then they are less than a half-day's march behind us. Ruck up. As long as we have the lead, we may yet escape. He led them down again, through twisting passageways and long jagged stairs cut through mined tunnels and natural caverns. Carmen's party spread themselves throughout their charges. Their armed presence helped to calm them, thus preventing the all-out flight that fear's nightmare deigned to bring. Beneath them, a low rumble could be heard, echoing toward them from far below. It was a sound that they were beginning to understand well. Another river keg, Tariq said. Yes, but it is a ways off yet. Let's just hope that there is a way across it. This trail is well used, Kerr said. The stairs show signs of centuries of wear. Whether they use the river for a water source or a means of travel remains to be seen. The stairs soon led to a tremendous cave and chasm, over which a stout rope bridge had been built. The river screamed through the gorge far below. Bring Kaelor up. We should check this bridge before we dare cross it. What is it? Kaelor asked. An old bridge, Kerr said, but who knows what traps may have been set. I'll check it out. Moving cautiously, he looked into every dark corner before approaching it. The stone before it looked solid, as did the massive iron pins that held the thick cable supporting it. The cave continued upward beyond his sight, and he could see no dangers lurking there. Creeping closer, his senses were alive, the sound of his own footsteps seeming like hammer falls, although, in truth, he walked as quietly as any mortal could without floating above the ground. On the bridge, there were signs of recent movement. The dust on its wooden planks had been displaced by man-sized footprints, and there was little dust upon the trail itself. Reaching the edge of the chasm, he peered over it and under the bridge, but he could see no traps or defects in it of any kind. Setting himself, he placed a little pressure on the top ropes, and they seemed solid. There was nothing left to do but test it, but as a precaution, he tied his own rope to an iron pin and traveled with the rope onto the bridge. His own weight barely shook it. Step by step, he searched and moved until he was across. Securing his line to a stone outcropping, he beckoned for them to cross. One by one, Kerr commanded, and don't let go of Kaelor's rope. Tariq led the way and even jumped in the middle to test it. It was hardly affected by his weight. Carmen followed closely behind him. Go on ahead with Kerr, he said. I'll make sure everyone gets across okay. The rest of them soon followed, emboldened by the ease and safety of her crossing. It then seemed to all of them, even the young boys, that they could do it. Tariq counted them as they crossed, 23 of them in all, 11 women, 2 boys, Moldren, and their party with Brent. Relieved that they had left no one behind, he pulled the last boy that came past him aside. The young man had wide shoulders and a thick crop of brown hair. His eyes were wild, with a mixture of excitement and fear. Kyle, send the word to the front, Kerr instructed. I shall now take the rear guard. Leaving someone behind was now a constant threat. With such a large party, spread out along winding tunnels, it might be a long time before someone's absence was discovered. Okay, sir, Kyle said, and he was quick to whisper into his brother's ear ahead of him, and he to the Lady Lizette ahead of him, and so on, until the word finally did reach Carmen in the front. When the boys were safely ahead of him, Tariq drew flame and laid into the ropes of the bridge. The hemp cables were massively thick, but he hacked away relentlessly until it fell away into the rift. Dangling from the opposite bank, it would take a long time to repair. The chasm was wide, too wide for any orc to jump. Smiling at his handiwork, he turned and ran, hurrying to catch up. Very well, she told Leander. Send D'Artagnan back with him. The rear is now the most dangerous position of all. At once, he answered, and her orders were quickly followed. Kerr, how does it look? Another river is close by. I believe that the chasm is part of a vast network of streams leading to something much larger. The trail is well used, so we must be ready for anything. Send back the order for quiet march, she said. No talking unless it is an emergency. The path led them ever deeper into the earth, twisting this way and that, so randomly that no one among them, save perhaps for the dwarves, had any idea of what direction they were headed in. The darkness ahead was diminishing, and even the humans among them could begin to make out the shapes and sizes of things. Are we near the surface, some of them hoped, but it was clear to the level-headed among them that they were approaching something entirely different. The fortress. When the roar of the river peaked, and in volume, it was such that one man's voice could not be heard unless his lips were pressed closely against the ear that he wished to hear it. The trail led into a cavern so gigantic that neither its roof nor its end could be seen. The entire chamber was eerily lit by glowing fungi of all kinds in a myriad of phosphorescent colors. The bright mushrooms extended for at least a mile to the east and west, and even farther along the road ahead. 100 paces or so ahead of them, the foot of a massive bridge rested. Wide at its feet, it grew narrower at the summit, and then widened again on the far side. Beneath it raced a gargantuan torrent of water, cresting over mighty falls near the west wall of the cave. Beyond the bridge was a once mighty fortress, now mostly a crumbling ruin. Its ancient builders must have stood watch against darkness and doom. The path that they followed led over the bridge and into the fortress. It was then that the orcs' terrible drums again thundered, and not from several hours behind them, but near, oh, so very near. "To the fortress," Carmen shouted, "over the bridge, as fast as you can." Their fellows from Nordtown were now scared beyond reason. Their bodies were spent save for the surge of terror's blood. The boys, Zachary and Kyle, showed great courage, helping those too scared even to run. "Come on," Zachary shouted, "we've got to go now," until finally they were all fleeing for their lives. Carmen and her party were hard-pressed to keep pace with them, the dwarves lagging somewhat behind due to the shortness of their legs. Leander stayed back with them. Not a bad place to make a stand. "There is at least a battalion of orcs behind us," Kerr said while breathing hard. "Terrible odds, but we may have no choice." At the crest of the bridge, they could see beyond for some distance. The ruins stood between the chasm below them and a wide, swift river beyond it. The bridge was the only safe way across. "See there," Tariq directed, pointing ahead. 4 longboats are moored by the river." "Let's make for them," she said. "To the boats, everyone. Quickly." "We can stand here," Kerr replied, "and fight." "But what of them?" Carmen said. "What happens to them if we die? Let us save the fight for when there is nowhere else to run." Nodding, Kerr consented, and all of them agreed that it was the best thing to do. When they looked back, the enemy had begun swarming out of the tunnel like bees from a hive, and there seemed to be no end to them. "Run on," Carmen cried, "everyone to the boats." They flew on winged feet down to the bridge and through the ancient keep. Its walls were breached and crumbling, its stones moss-encrusted and glowing. In some yesteryear, it must have been a glorious sight, but the blast of siege and the ravages of time had left it a lonely ruin. The path was well worn, almost a road. Clearly, the boats were often used by either the orcs or some other denizens of Under-Earth. Reaching the river, they looked back. The orcs were approaching the foot of the bridge, and it was there that their dark commander ordered their formation. "First battalion," she commanded in a voice made loud by sorcery, "battle ranks of 3s." The orcs immediately tightened their formation, unslung their thick round shields, and readied their spears. The longboats. The boats were both long and wide of beam, having space enough for a crew of 40 and 10 benches for oarsmen. The craft was steered from the stern by a well-built tiller and rudder assembly. 4 in all, they were tied well to moorings, riveted to docks jutting out into the river. "I can handle it," Leander said. "Darton and I used to work boats just like these in the port harbors of Arundel." "The river is swift and deep," Kerr cautioned. It might be hard to pilot. I know that I can steer it, Leander assured him, but with so few oarsmen, we won't be able to fight the current. There is no time to worry about it now, Carmen said. Everyone into the boat. Dartin, take Dow and cut the other 3 loose, she commanded. We can't have them following us. We're on it, Dartin said. Racing against time, they ran from dock to dock, cutting the tether lines and pushing the boats off. The current took them swiftly, and in moments they floated into the dark tunnel, leaving the cavern. There will be no turning back once we shove off, Dartin warned. There never is, Dow said with a grin. Let's get out of here. Running back, Dow turned away and looked to the bridge. I shall leave them with something to remember us by. Hurry, Dartin urged. They are waiting to shove off. Dow hardly heard him, because he had already begun to raise his power from within and without. Ancient elven words, the names of things given to them by the gods from the day they were born, poured from his mouth in his memory. He called out to them now, a warrior mage once dead, now reborn, and his heart was filled with fire. In the palm of his right hand, a miniature sun burned. In this, he hurled like a meteor at the ranks of the orcs who had reached the top of the bridge. His ball of fire exploded among them in a tremendous torrent. Most of the orcs there were burned unto death in an instant, some others throwing themselves over the parapet and into the river below to extinguish themselves, and in so doing died anyway. Chaos reigned among them for some time, until their leaders regained control. Dow sprinted for the dock and leaped over the gunwale and onto the deck, obviously quite proud of himself. Can we go now? Carmen asked. Please proceed, he answered, hardly fazed, with his fists on his hips. Tariq held the ship's line fast from the dock, waiting for the moment to cast them off. Is everyone aboard? Tariq asked. All accounted for, Kerr said. Now climb aboard, laddie. The bastards are on the move again. The ranger turned back, and a strange countenance came upon him. Don't do it, lad, Kerr pleaded. You'll need time to get them to safety. No, Carmen pleaded. Get aboard at once. I'll catch up. He answered as he released the line, pushing the boat hard and away into the current. I will love only you forever. No, she screamed. Moving toward the gunwale, she prepared to swim to shore, but Leander held her fast. You will die if you tried, he said. Even with your helm, you will never beat this current. While you both still live, there will always be a chance. Tariq, she cried, but he was already gone, concealed beneath the folds of his chameleon cloak. Foolish boy, Kerr exclaimed. He swore that he would have his revenge. Kalor tried his rope, but the current had already carried them well past its magical reach. Passing into the tunnel, they soon entered the dark world of under-earth once again. Dow unsheathed his dagger and stabbed it into the prow to light their way. Borrowing a locket from a young woman named Susanna Merchant, he cast another light spell upon it, and with it they brought light to the boat. Darkness might have been better, because Tariq had become dear to them all, and each of them was crying. Carmen leaned over the gunwale, sobbing, desiring most of all to cast herself into the water and die. Never before had she known such pain, but she was a soldier still, and they needed her. She picked up the pieces of herself. She would never abandon hope, not as long as she still lived. He had seen his death in a dream many years before. He knew that this place was to be his end. It was a destiny that was more than destiny. It was his duty. Revenge and its call seethed within him. His people called out to him for it from the grave. Running into the ruins, he paused to fire arrow after arrow into their ranks. Blending in, he was invisible, but his arrows were not. In moments, the orcs believed that they faced many enemies and not simply one. They formed tight ranks in defense. His arrows spent, he removed his ring and swallowed it. Taking a vial out of his pouch, he drank it, and soon the strength of a giant was his. Moving swiftly, he used what cover he could and prayed that his cloak would do the rest. Slipping from rocks to ruin, between pits and crevasses, he worked his way wraith-like toward the orcs. He knew that he had no chance of surviving against so many, but he would buy his friends time. Very soon he was among them upon the bridge. Allowing his mind to relive the horror of his youth, his father's murder, his mother's rape, and her death within his arms, he remembered the wolves and the burning. It was enough, more than enough. He would kill them until his arms could no longer wield a blade. Reaching the bridge, he crept slowly forward, allowing his cloak to work to its fullest potential. Waiting while many of them passed him by, he lurked, huddled and concealed, hoping to strike at their heart. Near the formation's center strode an aged war master, 8 feet tall and still hugely muscled. He bore many scars and carried many scalps, but it was his eyes that Tariq recognized, for here was the very orc that had slain his father and defiled his mother. If he killed no other orcs this day, it would be enough to kill this one alone. Moving desperately quickly, he stood before the shocked war master. Speaking not a word, he hewed at his knee, desiring only to bring him down to eye level. Tariq had no way of knowing the full effects of the potion that he had drunk before that moment. His blow was so forceful that he severed both of the orc's legs above the knee. Blood burst from the stumps as the stunned beast tried to step forward upon legs that were no longer connected. Tariq caught him with his left hand, as easily as if he was catching a hurling ball. "This is for my father," he said in Orcish, as he drove his sword into his enemy's heart, "and for my mother." Gutting the beast, he tossed what was left of him off the bridge like a rag doll. To the army of orcs, it seemed like the hand of God had torn their leader in half before their very eyes. Nearly invisible, Tariq infiltrated their ranks and then began to slice one throat after another. Camouflaged, it seemed that his blades alone would appear and then disappear, leaving another orc or two dead, and then 2 more several columns further in. Tariq knew that his surprise would not last long. He did not hesitate. Using what luck that the gods had given them, he attacked on the run. How long his enchanted strength would last he could not know, and he did not intend to waste any of it. With one of his father's knives in his left and flame in his right, he cut and spun, crashing into their ranks like the waves of a tempest. The orcs tried to rally, but confusion reigned among them. Their enemy was a ghost, a flaming sword now there and then gone. "You fools," their commander shouted from the rear. "He is invisible. Form tight ranks, shields, and spears." Well trained, they summoned their courage and rallied, closing their gaps tightly in order to either trap or extricate their adversary. "Surrender," she shouted. "Never," Tariq answered flatly. "Then you will surely die," she said. "Notice now that your invisibility cloak is failing." She spoke truthfully, for indeed, some other magic was cancelling out that of his cloaks. He was invisible no more. "My friends have escaped," he replied. "I have no purpose now but to kill you all." "Your friends may have escaped for now," she said, "but if they fail to steer down the right fork, they will be driven over the falls of the damned and smashed to pieces 3,000 feet below. Die well, Ranger." His battle cry was a guttural scream, a death knell, a desolate gurgle of despair for his failure, a shout from his very soul that stole away all the other sounds around him and made his enemies pause. The orcs surrounding him pressed inward to crush him between their ranks. A hedgerow of spears assailed his front and his back. A stone rampart 5 feet tall railed the bridge, and onto this he leaped. They followed, thrusting and hurling spears at him, but war's blood seethed within him now, giant strength fueling his legs and adding to his every move. With him cleaving orc spears in two and smashing their shields to splinters, few among them avoided the devastation of his blows. Often he leaped like a running deer to avoid a hail of javelins, farther and higher than any normal man ever could have, only to land expertly, still on the run, always hewing, and never still. His cloak no longer concealed him, but it now acted to catch dozens of barbs from bows and arrows, Atlatl hurled spears, and red orc and death bows. Its magic foiled It was pierced. It was torn. But somehow Tariq was not. Reaching the crest of the bridge, he neared their center. Behind him were 200 orcs and scores of dead. To his front were twice that number, and their leaders were among them. Dark Alfar, fairies of darkness, dressed in adamant mail, one helmed, the other a woman with her hands held high. Working feverishly, she began casting spell after spell against him. Killing orc after orc, the narrowing of the bridge top allowed only a dozen enemies to press him at one time. Fighting expertly, he moved in circle and counter-circle, using his next foe as a shield to protect him from those behind him. The orcs began piling up beneath his feet, body after body crashing down dead and dying. Caring nothing for his own life, he welcomed the spirit of revenge that had claimed his soul. He was death incarnate. It seems impossible, their leader considered, but he is actually holding his own. He cannot win, she said. He is but one ranger. One ranger indeed. They watched him then, for here was just the kind of nemesis that they had always dreamed of. This ridiculous elf could challenge even them. Orcs surrounded him, assailing him from all sides. Wherever his sword struck, he severed limbs or clove bodies in two. In order to reach him, the orcs now had to climb over a mound of their dead. His defense was pure attack, completely berserk. He was then their master. The orcs were now beyond angry themselves. They wanted their own revenge, and they sought it with madness. Tariq was indeed but one ranger, one elf after all, and his luck had its limits. The Dark Witch had called upon the unholy powers of her goddess, and with her magic, she battered Tariq with an invisible hammer. He barely felt the pain, but it was the first major wound that he had suffered, and this from an unseen assailant. He faced either an invisible foe or the fell powers of their evil gods. Laying about himself like a whirlwind, he fought blindly, but his blades met nothing but air. He was struck in the face, his nose smashed and his cheeks torn. He knew now that it was magic alone that had struck him. In the top of his mound of death, he was a target too easy. His only chance was to kill the witch and the orc's leader. "For common," he cried as he charged down the rightmost parapet, killing any orc that came too near to him. He rapidly closed the gap, but the witch's hammer struck him again and again. His left arm was hit hard, his wrist broken. Struck again, he lost his father's blade. Knocked off the parapet, he fell into the orcan host. Decapitating one, he caved in the chest of another, eviscerated a third, and hewed the legs off another. One ranger, indeed alone, oh, so very alone, and inevitably an orc spear did find his flesh. Stabbed through the kidney, Tariq cut off the spear's head and snapped off the shaft behind him. The orc tried to punch him and paid with his life, but victory was not to be his that day. War clubs crashed into him. A spear pierced his thigh and another his calf. He was overborne. They piled their bodies on top of him to press the rest of the life from his lungs. Gathering the last of his fury, he heaved, standing mightily. Many of the orcs were hurled off the bridge and into the maelstrom. 10 more were thrown back, and still he held his sword ever burning. "Face me," he croaked to the Dark Alfar commander. "Hold," their adamant leader commanded. "Drop your sword and surrender, and you will be treated with a soldier's honor. I challenge you to single combat. And to the victor? To the victor, life." Agreed. Tariq stood, bleeding, pierced yet resolute, only able to see through one eye, nearly naked, his clothing ruined, ragged, removed. His left arm was useless below the elbow, his forearm smashed, destroyed. His right arm still held flame with a giant's strength. He could barely stand, let alone fight, but stand he did, nonetheless. "Surrender," the leader said. "You cannot win. You have done well. There need be no shame, no more waste of life. You will not take me alive. There is no honor in this duel. You are dying. I will not fight you, but if you allow us to take you prisoner, I swear that I will face you in single combat once you are healed." What is your name, Dark One? I am Elric Duaredheim, son of Oswald, descendant of Marcius. And yours? I am Tariq, son of Eonid and Oswin, who were murdered by the orcs of this tribe when I was but a child. Lay down your sword, Tariq. The battle is over. Suddenly, his strength faded, and his sword grew heavy, his wounds debilitating. His life's blood nearly spent, he knew that he had no chance. One orc stood between him and the parapet. I'd rather see you in hell, he swore. With a sudden thrust, he planted flame in the orc's heart, pulled the dying wretch down into the path of the advancing host, then half jumped, half crawled over the lip. With one last glance at Elric and the witch, he smiled and let go. The orcs tried to catch him, but failed. One heartbeat more, and then the maelstrom took him. Such a waste, Elric said. And at a great cost, the witch answered. How many of our battalion did he slay, and alone? It would appear, Elric said, that one ranger can do much. If ever we meet him again, I shall not underestimate him, she praised. He has fallen into chaos, Elric said, the mightiest river in under earth. His body is being dragged down into the bowels of hell, where it is said that only the ancient ones dwell. We will only meet this one in the afterlife. These vermin are full of surprises, she mused. I will never again count one of them dead until I see their corpse cold, and even then I will remain cautious. Tariq fell and fell. His landing was violent, nothing pretty. More of his ribs were crushed, his right arm broken, but he hardly felt any of it. The water was cold, colder than the Arctic Sea, yet unfrozen and salty like the ocean itself. He inhaled as much of it as he could. Better to hasten death, he thought. He drowned forever, and then everything went black. That's where we'll end episode 35, at the bottom of page 462. Episode 36 should bring us to the finale, to the end of the book. Hope you enjoyed the reading. Tariq's fall into the river chaos. As always, read The Drums of Doom, part 2 of the Duaredheim Staff Saga by me, and all of the following novels. Thank you and have a great night.